the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. This is Indiana Issues. Here's your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz.
Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. We're coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Today on Indiana Issues, Governor Eric Holcomb gets a primary challenge, the Democrats debate, and trouble for one state lawmaker. And join us to talk about those issues and a couple other items are our panel of political pundits who joins us on a regular basis. Former chairman of the Libertarian Party, Brad Klopfenstein. Brad, thank you for being with us.
Abdul, thank you.
Our resident Democrat, Kip Tew, also former state party chair. Kip, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Former writer for the Indianapolis Star and now one of the editors at the Statehouse File, Beth Schneider. Beth, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
And, of course, former chairman of the Marion County Republican Party, Kyle Walker. Kyle, thank you very much for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Let's start with one of the big news items of the last couple of weeks. Governor Eric Holcomb looks like he may have a primary challenger. Brian Roth, a Republican businessman from Carmel, announced filed paperwork that he's going to run. Still got to get the signatures. He runs sort of a leadership and consulting firm out of Carmel, putting veterans to work. Mary Beth, let me start with you. What does this say? Is this something that should be on people's political radar screen?
No.
Welcome back from vacation.
If this was serious, he would have done a rollout. He would have been doing interviews. I think it's probably more about getting publicity. It's also very hard to get on the ballot in Indiana. I haven't seen any reason why he's running something that he is upset with the governor about to warrant a primary challenge. So I don't take it seriously.
So, Kyle, did Mary Beth just steal all your thunder?
Well, she is correct.
First time Kyle's ever said that about Mary Beth.
Not true. No, but, this is not a serious challenge. I'm not sure what Mr. Roth's real plan is here, but I don't think he has really any chance to have any significant impact on this race. And Governor Holcomb's record is pretty incredible. It's a lot of measurable, specific results that Hoosiers like. So I don't think you'll see any challenges to Governor Holcomb in the primary or the general that are all that significant.
Kip, let me get you, like I said, from the Democrat perspective. Is this sort of a perfunctory challenge? Does it really matter, or is it something that Republicans really should take seriously?
Well, you said it was big news, and I was kind of surprised you said that because I don't know that anybody even knows the guy. It could be that he's a multimillionaire and he's going to put his own money in which case I would say then it's going to be a significant challenge. It could be he's a gadfly. We don't know anything about him yet. He has not revealed anything about himself. So I think it's more of a wait and see whether this guy has any seriousness about him or not. And I'm going to take issue with Kyle with respect to whether or not there'll be a serious Democratic challenger. I think potential exists that there will be a very serious challenger.
So would that serious challenger be Dr. Woody Myers, or would it be somebody else?
Well, Eddie Melton has filed an exploratory committee. I think he's getting to the end of his exploration. He's going to make a decision whether he's going to run or not. If I were a Republican, I would not underestimate him. I think he's going to be a big star in our party in the future. Whether or not he decides to go to the post or not, we shall see. And obviously, Woody Myers has a pretty darn good resume to come into this race, and we will see. I think I think that Kyle's smart enough to know you don't get overconfident in these races because anything can happen, a year from now.
Brad, let me get your chime in.
First, I've never heard of this guy, and I kind of agree with Kyle. It's like usually they've got an axe to grind. They've been at least a troll on social media. I mean, this guy, I've never heard of him, and I've heard of a lot of people that other people haven't heard of. So I'm going to
He's probably a Russian agent, then, right?
Possibly. I'm going to skip forward in the program right now, and my prognostication is we will never utter this dude's name again.
But let me ask you this, though. If you look at some of the polling that's been done, whether it was our polling we did in Indy Politics, some of the other polling, Eric Holcomb, while he's in the 60s, there's still a significant anywhere from 20 to 24% of the population either don't know who the governor is or, for that matter, just have no opinion. Mary Beth, after 3 years, is that something a sitting governor should be worried about, where a quarter of the people either don't know you or have no opinion?
Well, somewhat, but it also then depends on who the Democrats are putting forth and whether they're able to take advantage of that and label in some ways. I think frankly, I think his one vulnerability is on education. And we saw once before when people were really unhappy about certain things going on in education, a Democrat came out of nowhere to beat an established candidate. So it can be done. It's much harder with a governor, however, to stick just that label on him because it's one factor among maybe 4 or 5 that you're choosing as a voter. But I do see that as the one area that someone could take advantage of.
Is that a weakness, Kyle, for the governor, the issue of education? Because we got the whole issue of teacher pay, and the most recent controversy in Indiana, the iLearn test results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, education can be a challenge for any governor, obviously, and I think the governor has a record of making significant progress on that issue, and again, as I mentioned before, has a very positive record to run on as it relates to the jobs commitments, the economy, the state of government generally. The budget surplus that the state has is a record high. And I think to your question about name ID, he's a very well funded, very well organized campaigner. The state party also is very well organized and funded. And he's not going to take anything for granted. So I think by the time most voters are paying attention, that awareness gap will have shrunk significantly.
Kip, like I said, you've been in this business a long time. Should a sitting governor be worried or concerned that nearly a quarter of the people either don't know him or have no opinion of him? I mean, now granted, Eric Holcomb is coming after Mitch Daniels and Mike Pence, who were both famous and infamous in their own ways for different reasons. Is this something that Eric Holcomb should be concerned about?
Sure, he should be concerned about it, and I fully expect that he'll use the money he's raising to address that concern. And I'm not in the business of defending him, but I'm going to say that part of this is really the circumstances that we live in these days, and that is Donald Trump takes up all of the political oxygen. There is almost none left for anybody else to breathe, and so he's in part a victim of that, but he's also a beneficiary. He wouldn't be in the office he's in, but for the election of Donald Trump. So you get and you give in this business.
Brad, sitting governor. Quarter people aren't sure who you are.
I agree with both Mary Beth and Kip on this. I think if he has,
everybody came back from vacation all agreeable.
I know. So
we can talk about the debate and we'll change.
Okay. But yeah, I do think that there's an undercurrent on education, and I think that there's, especially at the district level, some mandates that are expensive that don't make any sense that seem to indicate that maybe there's a little bit of cronyism, where there's a lot of money being spent on specific infrastructure needs, or even the iLearn seems to be unnecessary and wasn't vetted, and I'm not sure that the company that put that on is all that credible. That's something he could be hung on. He does have a name ID issue in so much as he was never an elected official prior to being governor, so he didn't have a congressional district to fall back on. He'd never run for statewide office other than the primary for Senate, so I think he's still struggling with the name ID, and frankly,
he actually ran for state rep and lost, but
okay,
he probably wants to forget that.
but Kip's right. I mean, as the national economy goes and Indiana economy goes, that's going to determine a governor's race. And if Donald Trump remains popular in Indiana, that's probably good for Eric Holcomb. If not, that could be bad.
You're watching Indiana Issues, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Our guests today are Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Kip Tew, reporter for the Statehouse File, Mary Beth Schneider, and Republican Kyle Walker. I want to change gears a little bit. New legal trouble for State Representative Dan Forestal already. Had been charged with operating a vehicle while intoxicated, resisting arrest, risking law enforcement, and felony count of impersonating a public servant. Now, civil allegations due to statements he made during a House committee hearing, stating that former IMPD Assistant Chief Bill Benjamin had been indicted by the U.S. Attorney. Turns out that was not true. Now, defamation lawsuit. There have been some calls for Representative Forestal to step down. Kyle, is this just another feather in the hat? Should Dan Forestal give up his seat?
Well, I think what's become clear is that Representative Forestal, seemingly and by some sources, has a substance abuse problem, which is, it's sad and it's unfortunate and it's a personal problem that he's going to have to deal with. I think it probably does preclude him from being an effective legislator at this point, just because of some of the sort of salaciousness of his police report, and these comments that he made on the House floor, appear to be very unfortunate and probably legally troubling for him. Unlike a campaign stop where you can say just about anything, when you are on the House floor as an elected leader, you've got to be very careful with the allegations that you state.
Mary Beth, is this a case where just all the pressures of the criminal matters, civil matters that can a lawmaker effectively govern in this type of universe?
No, I don't think you can. And honestly, if Dan, you're listening, it's time to spend more time with your family and perhaps a therapist. This is really unfortunate. It's not just an arrest, it was the way he behaved during it. And I think voters and constituents have a right to expect better behavior than that. And so whether this goes on to be something that he's held criminally culpable for, that isn't the standard in politics. The standard in politics is whether you can effectively represent your area, and I don't see that now.
Kip, we've seen lawmakers in the General Assembly step down, resign, leave for matters that did not involve any sort of criminal or legal matter, just caught maybe doing some things they shouldn't have been doing. Should Representative Forestal, should he step down, or can he continue to effectively represent his district on that near east side of Indianapolis?
Dan's a personal friend of mine, and Kyle, I think, hit part of the nail on the head. He's got a substance abuse problem, addictions and disease. I have nothing but sympathy for him. I think he's a wonderful human being, so I'm not objective about it. I hope he gets the help that he needs. Thankfully, it's a part-time legislature, and we shall see in January whether or not he can be effective or not. I think it's a call that he needs to make in consultation with his family, whether the pressures of the job and his other job are leading to make the disease worse. I don't know. But I understand what Mary Beth said, but it kind of hurts to hear it sitting next to her because I know Dan and I know what a good person he is, and he's got a disease, and we don't treat that disease like we treat other diseases in society, and part of it is because how the disease manifests itself with some people, and clearly, if the allegations are true in the police report that he did everything that he did, it's not a good reflection upon him nor the body. Or politicians in general. I don't know if they're all true or not true. I do know that when Dan is sober, he's a great guy, and hopefully he can turn his life around.
Brad, you were most recently were a resident, actually a constituent of Representative Forestal. What was the conversation amongst the people in the district? Was it he needs to step down, needs to go, get help? Like I said, you have some perspective that the rest of us just don't because we're not residents there.
Right. Up until Tuesday, I lived in Dan's district. I considered Dan a friend, as Kip does. He lives 300 yards from my house. He's a great guy, but there is a problem there, and I think that he will be ineffective as a legislator moving forward and probably not effective for our district. There are a lot of good Democrats that live on the Near East Side, and just discussions that I've had with other elected officials and neighbors, I think that they believe he's going to struggle to effectively represent that district. So I want the best for Dan, and I think that if he gets the help he needs now, it might be a good time to step aside, let somebody else fill in that role so that they can be a little bit more effective, and then maybe regroup and come back and try to get into politics in a couple of years.
Let me throw a question out before we take a break here. And this is directed to Kip and to Kyle, since you both were former state chair, former county chair. At what point does a political party step in? Like I said, not just single out Representative Forestal, but say, there is we have somebody that has some issues or some struggles. At what point does the party step in and say, hey, maybe being here isn't necessarily best for you, taking some time away to get your house in order is the better approach to take for now?
In my experience, there's certainly a time to do that as a party chairman or leader. It's a case-by-case basis. I mean, and it does come down to whether or not they can effectively represent their district or the area in which they're elected. And it also comes down to sort of what was the transgression. I mean, to Kip's point, unfortunately, this is a disease, as he said, and so and I think public opinion has shifted on this as people understand that this is a disease. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not to be held accountable for it, right? And it doesn't mean that he couldn't potentially be asked to step aside, but it's not like it once was. And, in my experience, the times that I'd asked folks to maybe move along, it was when there was some, gross hypocrisy and issues that were just simply, unacceptable and really damaging to the party.
Kip, I'll give you the last word on this one.
I don't have anything else to say about it.
I totally understand. You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics. We're going to take ourselves a quick break. When we come back, the Attorney General and the BMV are kind of at it, and the Democrats, they're on stage, and they go to the debate. You're watching Indiana Issues from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazi, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Come to you from the Edge Media Studios, downtown Indianapolis. Our guests today are Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Kip Tew, Mayor Beth Schneider of the Statehouse File, and Republican Kyle Walker. The Indiana Attorney General and the BMV seem to be having a little bit of a tug of war over the issue of gender identity on driver's licenses. The Attorney General kind of putting sort of the brakes on the move by the BMV to give people sort of that option with respect to their gender. Mary Beth, this is something you folks at the Statehouse File have written about. Is there a legitimate concern here, or is this tug of war politically between the AG and the governor's office ultimately?
I think it's probably more tug of war. I mean, there's always, the issue of was proper procedures followed and open meetings and all of those things. But this is something I don't really see that Curtis Hill needed to weigh in on. And make more of an issue out of it than it was. And I think it has more to do with beefing up his political base.
Yep.
I just want people to pass the popcorn. I'm enjoying the show. I know it's a little bit flip, but the fact of the matter is there is no love lost between the governor's office and the attorney general. It happens more frequently than you might expect between members of the same party. I've always found it kind of interesting that it does happen. Mitch Daniels, I recall, had another candidate for attorney general. He got beaten in a convention over it. So it tends to happen. I'm going to enjoy, I think, watching as things unfold here over the next few months to see what the Republican establishment does to try to get Curtis Hill out of there.
So, Kyle, what does this mean for Republicans going forward? It's interesting because we just got a news release out this past week about Republicans announcing their state convention in June of next year. Obviously, the governor's picked the primary, the attorney general through a convention. There's been some back and forth as to whether Curtis Hill would have a challenger, who'd be back in the challenger. Is this just another sign of maybe some fireworks that we're going to be seeing in June of next year?
Possibly. I mean, there's certainly, there is an issue there that is not going to go away. The governor's made it very clear very early his position on the attorney general, and that's not changed. This specific BMV rule, look, the BMV's had that rule in place or the ability for you to go in and fill their form out to do gender changes since 2009. And the court actually, it was a court order that required that to be moved to an X. And so it's not as if these are BMV policies per se that are new. So it's the timing of the challenge by the AG is a little bit questionable.
Klopp, does this mean a convention fight?
Probably, which that was already coming regardless. I think this was more of an attempt of Curtis Hill to reestablish his conservative credentials and also be known for something other than his transgressions from a year ago. So, I mean, if he didn't step down, so he is the attorney general. So his options are he can hang out in a cave until the convention next year, or he can try to make himself relevant and let people know he's actually out there trying to do something. That decision was kind of unnecessary, and it's not going to appeal to everybody, but it does appeal to the hardline conservatives, and I think that's what he's trying to establish.
Yep.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz of IndyPolitics.org. Democratic debate. As we tape this program on Friday afternoon, the 10 candidates for president all sharing the same stage, whether it was Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke. It's something you can see on your screen on ABC News. Kip, let me ask you, was this the debate that Democrats needed?
Well, I've got a lot of thoughts about this debate. I thought it was the best debate so far, and I thought it was the best debate in part because the media assembled took it much more seriously. I can't tell you how disdainful I was of Chuck Todd and that debate thing. One of the reasons we have Donald Trump as president of the United States is because the last cycle, the debates were seen as WWF.
WWE now.
Okay, whatever it is. You see how close attention I pay to it. But it was reality TV, and we were going down that path on the Democratic side with these jokes of debates with 20 people on them. Last night, I felt was very substantive. I thought there was a real disagreement between candidates on health care reform. I thought it fleshed itself out pretty well with respect to that. I don't think we fleshed out the tariff issue as well as I think we probably need to going into the election. But it was refreshing. We had 10 people up on stage actually talking about substantive issues, not talking about how big their hands are, not talking about how, what big of whatever they have. I mean, it was substantive. I thought Castro made a mistake in the way he went after Joe Biden. I thought Pete Buttigieg did nothing to hurt himself.
Nothing to help himself.
Right.
Well, I guess it depends on what you think the strategy is at this point. When you're on stage with 9 other people, there's only one way to stand out, and that is to become bombastic. And I don't think Democratic voters are looking for that. I think Democratic voters are looking for a serious, sober human being to take that position and take the fight to Donald Trump. They're not looking for a sideshow. And if you do what Julian Castro did, then you're going to get punished for it. And I think that's why Pete probably adopted the strategy he did. I do think Beto was the one who stood out the most in the debate, mostly by circumstance, but also because he showed real passion around an issue that obviously it was easy for him to show passion around. And I think he probably helped himself more than anybody else in that debate. We'll see.
Kyle, was this a substantive debate?
Yeah, by and large, I think it was. I mean, Kamala Harris certainly, she took her time to just speak directly to the president and get her digs in on the president, as did several others. I mean, I watched the entire thing, much to my dismay. By the third hour, I was over it. I thought the healthcare conversation was interesting, and I think ultimately, it was too large. 10 folks on a stage, I don't care if you've got 5 hours, right? There's just not enough time. But I thought the moderators did a pretty good job of keeping the focus on, frankly, the front runners and still allowing a voice for some of the others. I think Joe Biden still leaves as the favorite, and I think that he really caused some damage to both Bernie and to Elizabeth Warren. And I thought Kamala Harris probably came out as probably the biggest winner that was not one of the top 3 sort of front runners, because I totally disagree about Beto. I mean, I think what Beto did in his just entire presentation, he is the most unimpressive candidate up there in my opinion. And Buttigieg, I think you're right. I mean, to stand out, you've got to really throw bombs, or you've got to say, he didn't go with all of the little, kitschy slogans that everyone was itching to try to throw out. And it probably ultimately didn't hurt him or help him.
Mary Beth, does the fact that the stage before we had the undercard and then the main card and like 20 people, that when maybe the Democrats should have started at 10 candidates and then maybe whittled down to like 5 or 3?
Well, how are you going to do that?
I had a few ideas.
I think they have, they have a right to get some of their ideas out there, and I'm not sure when it's this far out, it should necessarily, we act like this is, oh my gosh, there's way too many. We're really bothered by this. Well, it's only September of 19. And people didn't even used to, get in sometimes until the beginning of the election
Spoken like
year.
a reporter rather than an insider.
Yeah. From a Republican standpoint, I want it to be 15 people in
Right.
the states
And from
because
my
it really
standpoint-
does a disservice to those that are real contenders.
My suggestion would be don't do 3 hours, do 3 nights, an hour each, because 3 hours is too much.
Three
I'll
nights would be
disagree
too
on
much.
Kamala. I thought she strung together one-liner after the next from her stump speeches, and she needs to do more than that. Bernie Sanders just yelled at us all night long to get off his lawn. That's really annoying. Pete Buttigieg does come across as the smart, sober, serious one, but you said who can take the fight to the president, and that's where he's lacking. The Democrats do not yet see him as the guy who can take that fight, and that's why he's at 5% and no longer in double digits. Elizabeth Warren, I think, did a pretty good job. I thought Cory Booker did okay. I thought Julian Castro was way out of line. You can get away with one time saying, don't you remember what you say? I think he said it 3 times.
Well,
and
he was
actually,
wrong. That's the worst part.
and that's and Biden was right. He did not say it quite the way Julian remembered it. And then on Beto, I think Beto got a gift from everybody else. They are patting him on the back and bless your heart, and you just go over there and run for Senate. That's what they were telling him last night. So.
Let me ask get Brad in here real quick.
I'm glad to see that Mary Beth has grown because I remember one time she told me it was too hard to cover 3 candidates running for an office.
That's a pretty good comeback, I gotta say.
And I commend Kyle for 3 hours worth of show prep for Indiana issues. I was not that dedicated, so I read the recap today. So
That's pretty good too.
But my takeaway is I think Mayor Pete, which is I think kind of where we're going on this little segment here. Mayor Pete's doing himself well just because he's kind of keeping his head down. I mean, he's obviously very smart. The interviews I've seen, he's presented well. He has not gone off the rails that much, and he's well funded. So I think as long as he can continue to stay in that top 5, that's going to serve him well and just kind of let the attrition happen. And then once we get a little closer to the primaries, I think then he can probably start getting out there a little bit more, but he's likable.
Let me ask you this, Kip. Go ahead.
Okay. No, go ahead.
Well, one thing I've noticed, like I said, and granted, polls are not predictions; they are sort of snapshots in time. With the polls currently showing Democrats extremely competitive or beating Donald Trump, does that make it harder to sort of whittle down this field of candidates if they can say, "Hey, I can win, I'm competitive"?
It's only September. So, I mean, we haven't had any nominating contests yet. So I think the other part of Buttigieg's strategy is I'm investing in Iowa and New Hampshire, which is traditionally where things get whittled down. They're not generally whittled down at the debates on the debate stage. Now, we've not had this many candidates before, so there had to be some whittling down. And I think the Democratic Party did a disservice to the party by letting Marianne Williamson, Andrew Yang, and all these folks who've never held political office. One of my criteria would have been, if you've not been in public office, you're not qualified to be president of the United States. That's just me, and we can have a long debate about that, but I think that's a critical element. But the back to Buttigieg, he's going to compete on the ground where he needs to compete. Iowa voters need you to touch them, need to see you, need to feel you, need all those types of things, and that's where he's competing hard. I think he's made the calculation that these debates aren't going to change too many minds, and I'm going to go compete where the minds get changed.
At the end of our program, we'll do our predictions and prognostications and what the voters are looking for. So, Brad, what should we be paying attention to down the road?
I think we ought to look to see if municipal elections, which have not been getting a lot of traction up to this point, can finally rise above the national election from next year.
Yep.
I think Beto O'Rourke's going to get a bump out of this, a pretty significant bump, and I think he's put assault weapons in the front of the debate as we go forward here the next couple of months on gun laws.
Well, he did give Republicans a clip that they will use over and over and over and over again, saying we will take your guns. I don't think that was well advised, as much as
totally
they cheered
disagree
for
with
it.
you,
but I wrote this week about Jennifer McCormick. I would keep an eye on her because she is not ruling out a run for governor. She's not ruling out a run for lieutenant governor as a Democrat. She's not putting any timetable on this, so I don't know, but she still has politics in her future, I believe.
Kyle?
I think Kamala Harris is going to be one of the most interesting candidates to watch. if they've reshuffled some of the early or the primary schedule on the Democrat side, but if she can be a contender getting into California, right, then all of a sudden she's potentially one of the front runners. Whether or not she can actually secure the nomination, I don't know, but she also looks like a very attractive vice president too. So I think she'll be interesting to watch.
Keep an eye on Hamilton County. The factualization of the Hamilton County Republican Party continues to grow more and more each and every day, and that could have complications into the next election cycle in 2020. And that is going to do it for this edition of Indiana Issues. Our panel has been Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Kip Tew, Beth Schneider of the Statehouse File, and Kyle Walker, Republican. Thank you all for being with us. Thanks to our friends at Edge Media Studios, and we'll see you next time. Take care.